Well, I think you've used that word, contributor. I think it's quite an interesting word, but let's look at it. How many of them do we have in a case like this when we talk about defined benefits, which comes from me as an employer, and which comes from maybe you as an employee? Because I'm thinking that it should be a two-way thing. Where I work should also contribute to my pension, and I too should also contribute. So how do you monitor such to see that it's actually being followed?
Yes, thank you very much. It's the contributory pension system. That is the reform. That is what the pension reform introduced. And what it is a percentage contributed by the employer and a percentage contributed by the employee. And these percentages are clear. In the 2004 Act, it was half-half. 7.5%, 7.5% for both. And what it is that it prescribes that is the minimum that must be contributed. We would have cases in the past where an employer elects to contribute the entire 15% on behalf of the employee. We have instances where employees decide to do a bit more than required by law. So it is what they decide to do. Our job as PENCOM is to ensure that the minimum set by law is met. There is no limit to the maximum of contribution. And it is that contribution from your salary that gives you ownership of your retirement benefits. There is no dependency on your employer, be it the government or the private sector, to fund your retirement benefits. You fund it fully funded from day one. You do make the contributions. It goes straight to your retirement savings account, and you get a statement every quarter. And so you can question things. Where has this money gone? And incidentally, we found it very useful in monitoring the private sector, because part of those who remit, deduct from their employee salaries and then don't remit to their RSA accounts, you're not going to realize this at the end of your working career. At the end of the quarter, you know how much has been taken out of your account. And if it doesn't reflect on your retirement savings account, then you alert PENCOM and then we move in. And we've had quite a bit of that going on. And yes, where employers deduct salaries and don't remit. So we're on it, and this is the beauty of ownership. Because otherwise, if it was just a provident scheme run by your employer, you have no idea what is happening till you retire, and then it's too late.
How do you also keep tabs on, I think Section 101 of this 2014 Act mandates every company that have more than 3 people working there to register in that scheme and make sure they contribute.
Yes.
How do you monitor that?
Oh, this is huge, and this is where the bulk of our resources go, because we must. We use the CAC, we use the it's an interdependent governmental regulatory agency. We do that, and we've also hired what we've called recovery agents across the 6 geopolitical zones of the country. It's an ongoing task, because what you have is people are resistant to paying. And then we're insisting that you must, for the future of your employee, and then the employee for their own future.
I was just going to ask you, sorry to interrupt that answer, I was just going to ask you how responsive, employers have been to it. Only recently, you increased, I think, the amount that has to be contributed from 15 to 18. The law now requires that 18% be contributed. Am I right on that? So you have 10% from the employer and 8% from the employee.
Absolutely.
What has the reaction been to that from the employer's perspective?
The reform has been ongoing. The Pension Reform Act 2014 was actually started in 2009, just about 5 years after the Act came into place. And the reason was there were a lot of issues that came out of implementing the law. We were involved in the 2004 law, and some things that looked good on paper didn't actually become workable. The question you've asked is the reaction. It has also been very consultative to get to this point. So everybody has had an input. We didn't think 18% was all right. We thought they could do more, because what we saw was that people just hovered around the minimum prescribed by law because they didn't want to have to pay more, even though their financials showed they could. But what we also did during the consultations and in the public hearings and presentations from different stakeholders was that set a minimum that people can subscribe to, so that compliance is a lot easier. So this is where it came from, the reduction from our proposal for more to the 18%. And I think both the employees and employers are happy with that.
One of the areas where you get plenty of protests is usually from government quarters. Some state governments have been compliant, some of them haven't. But what has been the perception on the whole?
Of the contributory system?
Yes.
You see, part of the awareness we've been involved in is trying to sensitize people. Once they feel that they have to take funds out of their salary, there's a basic inertia and an apathy towards that. But once we finish the sensitization, what they are seeing now, and we did a lot of that last year, going through the setting up zonal offices and going through the 6 geopolitical zones, is to show them how, yes, it might hurt to set aside money initially, but it's better for you in the long run.
But that is on the part of the employees. What about the employers? I mean, for instance, in particular, state governments.
Yeah, the state governments, that's actually in particular, because you know the Pension Reform Act does not cover them specifically, so they have to enact their own laws, and we've created a model law for them. A lot of the state governments we've engaged are very interested in this, and more are coming on board. Every day they sign the model law into a substantial regulation. The inertia has always been to put their resources together to start contributing. And they think, oh, where am I going to get the money from? You have to do an actuarial valuation. But we sit down with them, we'll have teams going out under the public sector pensions to show them that, yes, it might be a bit hard in the beginning, but that's the only way. Because the other alternative is not sustainable. Because what you have at the end of the day as pension liabilities become unbearable, and the states will continually owe unless you set aside for it ab initio.
So now, will states or agencies be able to access these funds for infrastructural development, and what will be the criteria?
They're already doing that, and that's why I said nothing is on lockdown. The only thing that is set is the regulation. So we are very clear on what to expect a state to have done before you can access the pension funds through bonds, the raised state bonds. The key thing is you cannot expect to access pension funds if your state is not contributing. So whose money are you trying to use to develop your state? So the first criteria before a state accesses the pension funds is evidence of compliance with the Pension Reform Act.
To what degree or to what extent will they have to contribute to qualify to access?
No, it's not to what degree. It's compliance is compliance, because every state is different. You cannot compare stage 1 with stage 2. The point is that they have different economies. Internally generated revenue is different. So this is why the law is clear. This is the minimum. And once you meet the minimum, then you're eligible for us to sit down and discuss.
Will there be a limit to how much funds they can access?
Of course. This is a department in PENCOM. We liaise with them. What I'm saying, we won't even sit down to talk about your say, because they have to pass all the other regulatory agencies. SEC has to approve. They have to go to the Ministry of Finance. There's a lot of long checklist on what they have to do, because I reiterate that these funds belong to the pensioners.
And you don't think that is risky, because you know everything about pension has to do with the reward system. And trying to think, because of the pictures I've seen over time growing up in the country, someone is working and you know you have a reward system waiting you when you're too weak or old to work, and such dreams are usually dashed. Now with this coming in, knowing full well that states, and we have seen what agencies and even states have done in the past, sometimes running into what you want to call bad debt that you can't even pay back. What kind of guarantee that my money that the state is going to take to run some affairs will be back?
It will, because that's part of the guarantees we'll insist on having, and they get it from, you see, what makes a state? There's a certain amount of money that comes to a state, because the way, and we have hinged our return of those funds to that, and that's why I mentioned the Ministry of Finance, because they have to go there, because most of this will be deducted from source in repaying the loan. Because the day that can happen, then we might also will pack up and go.
Just quickly, it doesn't cover those that were under the defined benefit scheme, and this actually, before you could register into the contributory scheme, you have to be of a certain age, you know. So how do you cover the backlog?
No, the backlog is already there, and what it is that the new scheme, when it came into effect in 2004, there was a cutoff. If you had 3 years or less to go to retirement, you didn't have to join because obviously the paucity of time for contribution, and those ones retired under the old scheme. And there have been retirees even before who are still living. So those ones are under the defined benefits. And that's part of this, what this law has done, is establish the Pension Transition Administration Department, the PTAD, to bring all of this under one entity so that they can sort out the growing backlog. Because all this stories about pension and back not being paid and all is to do with the defined benefit scheme, which is why the contributory pension scheme put pay to all of that, and there hasn't been issues. People retire and it's a seamless retirement. Now we're dealing with sorting out that lingering problem of pensioners and having to make sure that the government's lean resources are channeled right to those who actually deserve them. Because it's not as if the government does not release money for pensioners. When half of them is filtered to ghost workers, the real pensioners don't get it. So part of the mandate of PTAD, and they're up and running, you see the substantive head of PTAD even at this summit, is to restructure that system so that you remove intervention as much as possible and have a situation where these pensions go directly to the pensioners' accounts. They don't need to come and queue up anywhere. They don't need to come and pay anybody to get their pension form. So we're not just dealing with the future, we're also trying to sort out the past so as to make a holistic change in the pension industry.
All right, they certainly will look forward to that, I guarantee. But I want to thank you for coming on. Chinelo Anohu-Amazu is the Acting Director General of PENCOM. It's time for the headline news again with Joker Rogers.